Hello guys, I am back with another episode. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and it is a continuation of a message that was forwarded to me by one of our admins, a woman who is saying that she got married to a man who does a lot of rituals. The message reads like this: I had gotten myself into trouble. Who on earth did I marry? Sometimes we brush things off. The death of his cousin could have been a natural death. I kept on telling myself that it was just a natural death, yet I knew that this was not a natural death. I saw him cry, asking for help, those people who were choking him to leave him alone. So this was very clear that something was not right. Why would my husband ask people that we could not see, people that whom he claimed that were choking his own cousins, because he kept on saying, please leave him, please let him live, do not choke him anymore. I saw that this was not right. There was something that was wrong with all the things that my husband was doing. These were my thoughts that night as I slept in my king-size bed. I had recently bought a 1,000 thread count Egyptian bedding, very comfortable, but it felt like I was sleeping on a single bed, that one with springs. If you are poor and if you think of someone who is rich, you will think that once you get rich, you will be having a comfortable life. But on this night, this was not a comfortable life that I had wished for. I wished that I was poor. I wished that if only I was staying in a shack, even a one-room shack with a bed that had springs, not this Egyptian bed. Because on that night, as I was asking myself a lot of questions, this comfortable king-sized bed, it was no longer comfortable. It felt as if there were thorns that were planted on that comfortable bed. I had no happiness. This man that I had married was not a forex trader. The black gown and his response to his cousin's death said a lot. By the way, I didn't mention that he didn't go to the funeral. He made sure that everything was paid for. He just paid for everything whilst he was in the bedroom through the bank transfer. He never went to the mortuary. He never left the house. He told me point blank as we left for the Eastern Cape that he was not allowed to see dead people. Not allowed by whom? Who can say such a thing? I am not allowed to see dead people. But on that day, this is what my husband told me. He told me that he was not allowed to see dead people anymore. He said that in the past, he had seen dead people and it had caused a lot of havoc in his life. I didn't understand what kind of havoc had it caused in his life, because ever since I had known him, his life was perfect. He was a successful businessman. Not allowed by whom? I didn't ask a lot of questions. I just left. But as I slept on my bed that night, after hearing my sister's screams, I joined all the dots. Look like we were getting somewhere. After the incident, my sisters told me that they didn't like it here and they had to leave. I booked them their flights and they went back home. This was my home. I had taken the vows till death do us apart, and I had to live with my husband. Whenever I would think of running away from my husband, there was this other picture that I kept in my bedroom. This was a picture that was taken on our wedding day. Whenever I would look at that picture, I would realize how much I loved this man. This man had loved me as poor as I was, and he was a rich man, but he had chosen me. Of all the women that were out there in the world, especially here in South Africa, he had chosen me, a poor someone with a poor background. He had chosen me so that I can help him to enjoy his life. This kept me in his life. Life was very difficult. Grief had overtaken me. I felt extremely sad, especially with the fact that I saw him yield his last breath and he had peed himself. My husband's cousin, he had died a painful death. The way that he had died, it was not a peaceful death. The more that I thought about this, the more I was troubled the more it troubled me in my heart. This man, he had a family, he had children, and coming to Johannesburg, he had hoped to get a job and improve his life and the lives of his children, only to be sacrificed. I was sure that my own husband is the one who had sacrificed him. My husband was someone who didn't care about other people. On that day, he asked me a question that hurt me so much. My husband accused me of loving his own cousin brother more than the way that I loved him. On that day, he asked me a painful question and he said, "Why do you care too much about the dead? Are you not still alive? Why do you care more about my dead cousin brother? Yet the man that paid your bride price is still alive. Why have you failed to move on with your life? Did you ever cheat on me with my own cousin brother?" When he asked me this, I was truly hurt, because ever since I had gotten married to my own husband, I had never cheated on him. After the death of my husband's cousin brother, I noticed that even though when I met my husband, indeed he was a wealthy man and he was doing all of this forex thing that he claimed that he was doing, but after the death of his cousin brother, I noticed that his business was suddenly booming. He was bringing new banknotes. I'd never seen so much money in my life, and the money was only in US dollars. Sometimes he would leave the money everywhere. When I would wake up in the morning, the first thing that I would find on the floor, it would be brand new US dollar notes. And I started to count the days, and I noticed that it looked like each and every 5 years, on the same date, someone had to die. If someone didn't die on the same date, then on that same week, someone from his family had to die. These things had been happening for the past 15 years. Some of the relatives at the funeral told me that they had buried another relative who had died in the same manner. Everyone that dies from my husband's family, they always die screaming. And the moment that they want to mention the name of the person that they'll be afraid of, then they will die. This is what had happened to my husband's cousin, because just before he wanted to die, he called me into the room where he was. When I walked into that room, he looked at me and he whispered a name, but the whisper was so faint, so much faint that I could not hear what he was trying to say, but he tried to tell me the person who was killing him. Life went on like he had said. Life was supposed to continue. It didn't matter if his cousin had died or not. Life had to continue. Nothing changed in our marriage. He wouldn't spend much time with me, and still I didn't have a baby. This hurt me so much, because I am someone who really enjoy the company of kids. He would spend most of his time with his friends. I was just a trophy wife. He would buy me expensive jewelry, expensive clothes, so that when I would go out with him, people would see that he is a man who can take care of his wife. But when we were in our bedroom, he would hate me. He would call me names. He would tell me that the reason why sometimes his men could not perform, it was because of my body structure. But when he had met me, he told me that he didn't want someone with big hips and stuff. I am just a slender woman. But whenever we would be in bed, he would tell me that if you had big curves, maybe my manhood would do its job. But because you are this slender woman, this is the reason why sometimes I cannot perform. Most of the nights I'll end up crying. Sometimes I would cry just sitting on the balcony, and I would see that some people that will be walking past our house, they would look at me, and from the way that they would be looking at me, they would think that here is a woman who has been blessed. But deep down, I was just dying. It looked like he was more concerned on making his friends happy, because he would spend so much time with them. 5 years later, on this particular day, we were together on a Sunday morning as we were going to meet our friends. On that particular morning that he had invited his friends to come for breakfast. It was a couple's breakfast, And as we drove to Midrand, he had also made it a point that he forced one of his brothers to come with us. The brother kept on asking him what was the point of him, the man who was single, to come with us to a couple's event. My husband was someone who didn't answer you if you asked him a direct question. So on that day, he only ignored his own brother and he kept on driving. We all kept quiet. It looked like he was deep in thought and worried. Little did I know that it was time for another sacrifice. This time it was different, but it looked like he was getting tired of it. As we drove to Ribeauville in Waterfall, I saw something that I had never seen in my life. We were still on the N1 when I suddenly saw something like a black blanket covering the windscreen. Then I heard a banging sound. Then I was out. So this comes in bits and pieces as I was still unconscious. I heard sirens making noise. Then I heard something that sounded like a hacksaw making a very loud noise. They were cutting the Range Rover Evoque. They pulled me out and I sat in the middle of the road. Our car had rolled 5 times over. And I was confused. Next, I saw my husband coming out. He was all fine. My husband came out of the car that he had rolled over 5 times with no scratches. Then I became unconscious. Next thing, there were blue lights everywhere. People were stopping. There was traffic, police and SAPS and paramedics. What was happening here? I was still confused because even on my body, I just had minor scratches, but I just felt dizzy. At that moment, my mind was all over the place and I still saw my husband making a phone call to someone. We had gotten out of an accident, but the first thing that my husband did, he got onto the call, and on the call, he was speaking with someone who had a very funny accent, and I noticed that this person that he was talking to, he was a Nigerian man. After that, I collapsed again. The paramedics gave me first aid. Then I became better. About 30 minutes later, I then remembered that we were 3 and I was only seeing my husband and I. Where was my husband's brother? I asked one of the paramedics who was helping me. Then he said that he is still in the car. They were doing all that they could to pull him out of the car. I looked at the car and my heart was broken. My brother, this was a brand new Range Rover, but now from the way that it looked, it was just a complete write-off. It looked like a very old car. I even failed to recognize it. Then I kept on looking. Then I saw that there was an arm that was dangling out of the car. My husband's brother, he was seated at the back on the right side, and yeah, it was him. My mouth became dry. I became thirsty immediately, and I felt that there was something that blocked my throat, and yet no tear fell down. I knew that there was no miracle. My husband's brother, he was gone. It was time for another sacrifice. I collapsed.